I'm back. Not sure if this is working. Okay. So it seems like there's like maybe. Oh well, it's closed captions and it actually works. Um, it seems like there's like a 15-second delay, I guess. Feedback. I'm gonna throw on some headphones just to check how it sounds. Can I hear myself? I can't hear myself. I don't know why I can't hear this. Yeah. I've heard that problem before. Let me change the microphone. I'm gonna go back to the other screen just for a moment. Check, 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 check. This is with the new this is with the new mic. Let's check how that sounds. It's still there. Yeah, it's still there a bit, huh? It is quite annoying though, sorry. Seems to be working all right. If my computer doesn't explode. I know there's not a ton of people here yet, but I apologize in advance for the slightly strange audio. It's got like a little bit of a weird hum to it. I'm not sure why that's happening, but apologize for that. Hello to everyone who's here with us. And just wait for another couple of minutes just to make sure that people start coming in. Thanks, Kevin. That's way too big. And I lost it. There it is. Let's throw it up here. What happened to that? There we go. Okay, let's turn that off for now. All right, we got about 26 people here. I just saw your comment, Kevin. Yeah, it's very Japanese. I'll talk about that text that was on screen just a minute ago in just a minute. I just want to make sure that people are here. And it's about 8 o'clock, so we'll start getting into this. I'm Scott, and if you don't know me, I'm a photographer and videographer and a YouTuber, I guess. I do reviews and stuff. I do a lot of lens reviews, of course, but a range of topics related to photo and video on my channel. And I have reviewed a handful of Laowa lenses before, although few of these are it's the first time I've even touched a few of these, so I'm excited to get into introducing them today. Laowa has a really good lineup of macro lenses. There are 6 here, and so today we're going to talk about these lenses. I'm going to give a quick introduction to these Laowa lenses kind of in general, and we'll go one by one and talk about some of their basic specs and just kind of the ins and outs of actually using them. Some of the things that may be challenges with some of them, some of their unique perks, things that they can do that other lenses can't, and kind of try to differentiate why you would want to choose one or another of these lenses. Even though they're all macro lenses, they're definitely all different and unique. So we're going to talk about how they each kind of appeal to different types of work, different types of users, yeah, we'll go through that one by one. And if you guys have questions along the way, then please do let me know in the comments. I'll try and keep updated on them. I have my computer off to the side of me here, so try and make sure that I'm checking that. So feel free to ask questions along the way if there's anything you want to know. I did just get these lenses, most of these lenses, yesterday, and I only had a few hours to really play around with them and take just a very small selection of test photos just to show you like the different magnifications and stuff like that, how they each look at their closest magnification. But I really haven't had enough time to dive in deep with a lot of these lenses. So we're not really going to focus on like image quality and actual reviews today. We're going to talk about, like I said, just the challenges that each of them pose, the benefits that you get from some of them that other lenses can't do, and things like that. So, just checking questions quickly. There's a little bit of a lag on the stream, I guess, so I apologize in advance. You know, for those awkward gaps when I'm trying to check out all of the comments. You know, live stream problems. But anyway, thank you, a huge thank you to Laowa for letting me be part of this series. I was really honored, I guess you could say, to be part of it. There's been some amazing presenters in this series so far. If you haven't watched them already, they're up on Laowa's Facebook and YouTube, I believe, so you can go back and rewatch any of them. And there's some really valuable information in there. So I personally don't consider myself a macro master, but I do love macro. It's not my main area of work, but I do really enjoy it. So hopefully I can give you some good insight into these lenses today. But I've learned a lot from this series myself. So if you haven't watched those other videos, I really recommend that you do, because you can learn a lot from the other presenters in this series and different types of macro photography, really specialized areas of macro photography, which can be really fun and creative. And that's the best part of macro photography for me, is that it lets you see another world. Basically, you can take ordinary things and see the detail on another level, or you can really make things very artistic, and you can see things in a way that you just can't see with the human eye, which is really fun. You can play with colors, you can play with composition and light, and it can be very simple, or it can be very complex. There's definitely a lot of techniques that I've learned from this series, and it's a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to trying to you know, spend more time on some of those more advanced techniques that I've learned throughout the series. But at any level, I think that macro photography is very enjoyable and kind of magical in the way that it can really transform everyday things into really beautiful photos. So these lenses, with the exception of the probe lens, are all extremely well priced. I believe they're all under $500. We'll talk about that as we go through them one by one. But it's something that I think anybody can get into. There's a lens for everybody, and they're priced really well for a really high level of optical quality here. So if you're looking to get into macro photography, I think it's a great idea to pick up one of these lenses, and you will have a lot of fun with any of them. But we're just going to check some comments, and then we'll start getting into these in more detail. Dayong Lee. すみません、今日は英語でやります。また会う機会があればぜひ話しましょう。And hello to everybody else who is here. Alright, so we got a first question. Are these lenses all for full frame? And the answer is no. Most of them are. This lens here that I have on a Sony camera is an APS-C lens, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a second. But the probe lens, this 100mm lens, the 25mm, and the 15mm, and also the 16mm, can basically all cover full frame with a couple of exceptions. The 60mm will cover full frame at macro magnification, I believe up to half life size. So you could go 2:1 with this lens, 2 times macro, 1:1 macro, and then I believe at one more magnification down, I guess you could say 1:2, macro, I think it should still cover full frame. And then as you go out to infinity focus, because this can also reach infinity focus, it will no longer cover full frame. You'll get like a pretty heavy vignette on the image. And also the 15mm, I didn't have a chance to really test this yesterday, but I have reviewed this lens before a while ago, and my memory is terrible, so I apologize if I'm wrong. But it has a shift feature, and I believe that when you shift it 6mm up or down, it doesn't completely cover full frame. I may be wrong there. I meant to check that before now, but you know, just I got these lenses like literally a day ago, so I've been scrambling to try and do as much as I can with them in that time. But anyway, 100mm, the 25mm, the probe lens all cover full frame, no problem with any mode, anything that they can do. 60mm in macro mode only covers full frame. 50mm is fine, except possibly with the shift feature. Maybe Laowa can comment on this here to make sure that I'm correct there. And then this Sony lens, this is I believe 65mm, is an APS-C lens. Which one is my favorite? My favorite of these lenses, they're all great, but my favorite is the 100mm, and that's the one we're going to start off with today. We're going to go in detail to this one first. 100mm is just a kind of, I don't know, it's a focal length for macro that I've been working with since I started getting into macro. I had a Tamron macro lens, Nikon macro lens, Canon macro lens, and they were all 100mm lenses, and I got used to it. I generally like, I started off shooting portraits, so it was really good. That focal length is really good for portraits as well. And this lens, again, is really great for that as well. It can do a lot, so you can do portraits with it and get that nice shallow depth of field. You can do landscape photography with it, and of course macro. And with that 100mm focal length with macro, especially, you get a really, really shallow depth of field. And I find that it makes everything look really dreamy. And again, it comes back to that, you know, macro can really create a different world. You can see things that you see every day, but in a really different way. And being able to play with colors and light in the background, really, really blurred out with your subject really standing out in the frame, I think is really, really fun. And it just kind of makes it a bit more artistic. And I've always really liked that. Sorry for my pronunciation. Let me grab the Canon macro lens. I wanted to compare the size of this real quick. This is the Canon 100mm macro lens, and you can see here, let me go on the overhead camera, that these lenses are very, very similar in size. The lens itself, without the lens hood, is actually almost exactly the same size. And the Laowa is made of metal. This is made of plastic. And of course this one, the Canon lens does have image stabilization and autofocus. This one does not, but this Laowa lens can also go down to 2:1 macro, whereas the Canon lens is only 1:1 macro. But in terms of size and even weight, they're pretty comparable. So it just feels right at home for me, and that's one of the reasons why I really like this Laowa 100mm lens. You can ask, I think it's Kevin, I had talked about with this for a while, that I just really, really was really excited for this lens from the first time that I heard that they were thinking about it. So I'm happy to really finally have it in my hands, and I do hope that I can use it after this presentation today. I want to hang on to this one and have some fun with it, so we'll see if I can do that. And if I do, then I will have a lot more sample photos and maybe even an in-depth review coming on my YouTube channel as well. So I'm going to try and arrange that for you guys as well, because I've only had this for a day at this point. Let me put this Canon lens back. Alright, so before we get into this anymore, I just want to highlight what Dayoung Lee just said in the comments, that the 100mm, 65mm, this one here on the Sony, and also the 50mm double macro to be launched soon, are all APO specifications. So the chromatic aberration is almost invisible. 2 times the magnification, but okay, yeah. So the APO feature means that you have very low, basically zero chromatic aberration on these lenses. I found that the other lenses didn't have too much trouble with that either. But the APO design of the 100 millimeter and the 65 millimeter and apparently soon to come 50 millimeter are all APO. So I'm actually going to show you really quick. I took a sample picture to test for chromatic aberration. Let me switch over to that. Give me a minute. So this photo here is with the 100 millimeter macro lens. This was at 2 times magnification. And as you can see, there is pretty much no chromatic aberration at all with this. And let me try and pull up another test really quickly. Which picture is that? I'm trying to find this. Okay, 491. I made notes of all of my file names so that way I could keep them organized, and I had just a mess of notes everywhere. Alright, so let me switch over now to, this is the 60 millimeter lens, the 60 millimeter at 2 times magnification. And you can see here there is some chromatic aberration in front of and behind the text, the focus, the area and focus. Whereas with the 100 millimeter APO lens, there's no chromatic aberration that you can see. So that is the benefit of an APO design, which a couple of these lenses do have. While we're talking about the 100 millimeter lens and max magnification, I used this little doll right here to test the maximum magnification of all these lenses. This is a little Sylvania family doll, my daughter's doll. And you can see it's really, really tiny, and there's a little, let me switch over to the overhead camera here. There's a little rope on there. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but a little yellow rope around her waist there. And that's what I was focusing on. There we go. Really, really tiny. Sorry if the exposure is off here. But this is what I was trying to focus on. So let me switch over to those pictures now. Let's go back to, sorry, this is the chromatic aberration photo. So now the 100 millimeter lens at 2 times magnification, wide open. This is wide open. All of my test shots that I took were wide open on that little tiny doll. This little tiny doll right here, which you can see in my hand is extremely small, and that rope on her waist is even smaller, ends up looking like this at 2 times magnification, wide open. Now if we go to 1-to-1 magnification on that same lens, you can see that here. So this is 1-to-1 magnification, this is 2-to-1 magnification with a 100 millimeter lens, both of them wide open. And something else I wanted to show you, sorry, I just gotta find my pictures here. I wanted to show you the behind the scenes, the working distance for this lens, because the 100 millimeter lens has a pretty decent working distance. It's not like you have to get super, super close to the subject in order to to get it in focus. So let me pull that up. Okay, so this is the working distance for 2:1 magnification with the 100mm lens, and the actual working distance from the tip of the lens to the subject is about 65 centimeters or so. Not centimeters, millimeters, sorry, 65 millimeters or so. And then if you go down to 1:1 magnification, you can back up a little bit further to about 85 millimeters. So has a decent working distance. It allows you to get light onto your subject pretty easily, which is important. With macro especially, you need a lot of light. And this is with 2:1 magnification. So either way, even with 2:1 magnification with this 100mm lens, you have a good working distance, which makes it a little bit easier. Let me go back and check these comments here. I saw in one of the comments about the white balance with the 24mm probe lens. We'll talk about that when we get to it in a bit more detail. But I did find that there is quite a strong color shift with the probe lens. The white balance was way off for that compared to the rest. With the same settings in the camera, the same flash and everything used, the color was off by a couple of thousand Kelvin. And I honestly didn't even look at the details for the green magenta shift on my computer, but I remember seeing that the white balance was off by quite a bit with that probe lens. I'm not sure if that was, apparently it's not just me because somebody did comment about it, but in that case I would want to make a custom white balance, especially if you're using it for video. You would definitely want to make a custom white balance while you're shooting with that probe lens. Okay, so I think I'm up to all of these questions. And before we go on, I just want to highlight that there is a discount code for you guys if you want to, I'll put that on screen now, 223MSD. If you want to grab any of these Laowa lenses, you can go onto venuslens.net and you can get 5% off of any Laowa lens that you get on their website until May 31st. So it's available for the first 20 people only. So if you do like any of these lenses here today, and I will talk about price as well in just a second, then you can go over to that website, venuslens.net, and grab anything you want for 5% off with this discount code right here on the screen. So I'll leave that up for a couple of minutes here if you want to take a note, and I will also show it again before the end of this video. So while we're talking about that discount, the 5% discount, let me just go through and update you guys with the prices for all of these lenses. So the 100mm lens, which we were just talking about a moment ago, is $449. Now I'm going to say right out, the prices for all of these lenses are great. They're manual focus, and in most cases, again, which we'll talk about in just a second, they are manual aperture as well. But the optical quality is fantastic, and the build quality is really great, and they're really, really well priced. So if you're looking to get into macro for the first time, this is definitely a great place to start. So the 100mm lens is $449. Let's go backwards in order, 65mm, which is this lens right here on the Sony. This is an APS-C lens. This is $399. This is a 2:1 macro, but of course being APS-C there is some magnification there, so you can actually get more than that 2:1 macro magnification. The 60mm lens, which I have right here, this is also 2x magnification, and you can use it on full frame, but even though it does focus to infinity focus, the infinity focus is for APS-C only. If you use it on full frame, it'll vignette. In the corners, this is $399. The 25mm lens, this is a 2.5 to 5 times magnification ultra macro lens. This is also full frame. This is $399, and it's really, really fun. It's very difficult and kind of specialty, but that's a good price for something like this. And then you've got the probe lens. The probe lens is the only one I think that's over $500. It's a bit more expensive at somewhere between $14.99 and $16.99, depending on the standard version or the cine version. The cine version is a little bit more expensive. And then the 15mm, this one right here in the front, this is the f4 wide angle macro. Again, it's full frame. It goes down to 1:1 macro. I forgot to mention the probe lens does 2:1. The 15mm wide angle macro is $499. So all of them except for the probe lens are under $500, which is really great. And after the prices, I guess the next thing to go through and talk about is the mounts that are available for each of these lenses. The 100mm lens is available in 5 mounts, Canon EF, which I have right here. And at the moment, the Canon EF mount has electronics built in for auto aperture. You can set the aperture in your camera. It's not a physical aperture ring like the other ones are. The other mounts that are available are Nikon F, Sony E, Nikon Z, and Canon RF mounts, and those all have physical aperture rings. There are new mounts. This is something that I think I'm announcing for the first time. There are new mounts coming in 2020. Pentax K mount, a Leica L mount, and a Canon EF mount with a physical aperture ring. Like I said, this one here has electronic aperture control for the EF mount, but they are coming out with a Canon EF mount that will have a physical aperture ring as well. The 65mm f2.82 times macro APO lens. This is the APS-C lens on the Sony camera right here. This exists right now in Canon M, Fuji X, and Sony E mounts. Sony E mount is the one that I have right here, but in 2020, again, I think this is the first time this is being announced, they do have Nikon Z mount coming out, which is still APS-C for the Z50, and Leica L mounts coming out in 2020 for this lens right here, the 65mm lens. The 60mm, if we're going in order here in terms of focal length, the 60mm f2.82 times ultra macro, again, this is full frame in macro mode. This is available in Canon, Nikon, Sony A, Sony E, and Pentax K mounts. Sorry, I'm scrolling through all my notes here. I want to make sure that I don't make any mistakes on these little factoids here. The 25mm lens, this is the f2.8 2.5 times 5 times ultra macro lens. This is existing, this now currently has Canon EF, Nikon F, Sony E, Pentax K, Canon RF, and Nikon Z mounts available, and the new mount coming is the Leica L mount. Somebody's laughing at Pentax. So last up, I believe I did not talk about the 15mm yet. The 15mm lens right here. This is a f4 wide angle macro lens, again full frame. It is available in Canon, Nikon, Sony A, Pentax K, and Sony E mounts. Alright, so let me just check any other questions. Okay. I'm going to take the discount code off the screen for now. 65mm tiny lens. Yes, I did address that one there. Just in case you missed it, let's go back and double check the details of this 65mm lens here. So the 65mm lens is really small anyway, if you can't tell. I don't know how easy it is to tell here, but this is now in Canon M, Fuji X, and Sony E mounts. This is APS-C lens. It's a 2x macro, but that APS-C crop does give it a little bit more magnification than that, kind of. And there will be new mounts coming in 2020 for this. Like I said, Nikon Z, it's for the Z50, it's still APS-C, and also Leica L mount for this one right here, the 65mm lens. The difference between this 15mm and the 15mm f2, Kevin, you might be better off answering that, but I believe this 15mm is a macro, 1:1 macro lens, and it does also have the shift feature built in, but it's not like the main feature of the lens. The main feature is that it's the widest angle macro lens on the market in the world, I believe. And the new 15mm f2, I'm not sure, but I believe that may be a zero distortion lens. Correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't really seen much about it today. I've been focusing on these macro lenses so much for the past couple days. But I believe that it's the same focal length, but it will have different abilities. So like I said, this was a 1:1 macro lens. The 15mm f2, I assume, is not a macro lens, and it's going to specialize in some other area. All right. It's already been a half an hour and I haven't really gone past the first lens. So I just want to touch on a couple of final points for question. Let me make sure to go click on X-T3. I have used the probe lens on a crop sensor, kind of. I used it a little bit on the EOS R, which I have here, and when you're filming in 4K, this does crop in, so I guess that kind of counts as like a crop sensor. And I did also use it a bit on the Zcam E2, with which is a micro four thirds camera, but I had the Metabone speed booster on there. It worked great in both of those cases, but I don't have anything prepared and ready to show you specifically what it looks like. But I mean, it works. It works well. And my question from Raul Martinez: in my experience, how does the 100mm 2x work in different weather and temperature conditions? That is something that I hope to find out from now on. I got this lens in the mail yesterday, and I played around with it a bit, but I really haven't had a chance to push it into any extreme situations. But it's not weather sealed. And let me switch over to my overhead camera. I'll show you a little bit more in detail here. It's not a weather sealed lens. Take off the lens hood here and the lens cap, and also the front element will retract into the barrel quite far if you zoom out to infinity. So this lens does also have infinity focus, but as you can see, maybe it retracts quite far, so it's really open. And so of course you could put a filter on the front of there to protect that a bit, but on the rear end it's also not weather sealed or anything like that. So I don't think you want to push it into too many extreme conditions, but I haven't had any problems with it in the day that I've been using it. But this, like I said, I really do like this lens quite a lot, and I do hope to hang on to this, or at least get another one in my hands soon, so that way I can play with it a bit more in depth, test it more in depth, maybe make a proper review on it. And in that case, I can tell you a lot more about how it performs over a longer period of time. But I don't expect it to have any problems that you wouldn't expect it to have. I don't expect miracles in terms of surviving harsh conditions because of how open and vulnerable it really is. But other than that, it's very well made and everything. So for now, that's all I can really tell you, unfortunately. Sorry about that. But let's move on a bit about this 100mm lens really quickly. pull up my notes to make sure I don't skip anything I wanted to say. This is similar to the 60mm f2.82 times macro lens, which is right here. It's kind of like the, I guess you could say, completely full frame version of it. This 60mm lens right here does also work on full frame at macro distances, and it can focus to infinity. I've repeated this a few times now, but when you focus to infinity, or even like a medium focus distance, then it doesn't really cover that full frame sensor anymore. The 100mm can also do 2 times macro, and it can also go to infinity, but this is going to cover the full frame sensor all the way through that range. So they're similar in that respect, but this one works all the way through from macro to infinity on an APS-C sensor. And this one right here, the 100mm, will work all the way through that range from macro to infinity focus on a full frame sensor. And they both do 2 times, and they're both f2.8 lenses. This is also the first lens that allows automatic aperture and aperture control through the camera body. And again, this is only in the Canon EF mount, which you can see here. There are some electronics on here. And I guess this is a first for Laowa. So I think that's extremely useful. So it just feels more natural for me, using a camera like the Canon EOS R. And this does, with the adapter, the EF to R mount adapter, it does take that electronic communication, and so that means that you get like the focus assist features and everything on the camera, whereas you don't with lenses that don't have this. So if you are using a camera like the EOS R, for example, I would recommend instead, even though there's an R mount available, a native RF mount, I would recommend getting the EF mount and then adapting it with one of these, because you get the benefit of automatic aperture, of electronic aperture control, and those focus assist features in the camera. So as Yanni said, this is the the tripod collar, and I believe, let me double check my notes, I think that this cost $30 if you want to grab the tripod collar. Let me look at this tripod collar. Where are my notes? I have too many notes. I can't find it in my notes. Maybe, Yanni, can you correct me in the comments if this tripod collar cost extra or if it's always included? But anyway, on the front you have a 67mm filter thread here. So if you do want to put a filter onto there, so you kind of seal it off a little bit, it's a 67mm filter thread. And I believe that's actually the same as the Canon lens. I don't have the lens cap here right now, but I believe that might be the same as the Canon lens. Yeah, 67mm. So it's the same filter thread size as the Canon 100mm macro lens. And otherwise, let's see. If you do go for the mirrorless mount, like the RF mount, for example, it's a little bit longer. It's about 30 millimeters longer, and it's about 12 grams heavier. So the weight won't change all that much, but it is a little bit longer because it's for a mirrorless camera. This also has 9 aperture blades in the Canon mount, has 7 in the Nikon mount, and 13 in the mirrorless mounts, which is interesting. I don't have the mirrorless mount available, so I'm not sure like how that really affects the bokeh, but there are more aperture blades in the mirrorless mount versions, where you got 9 in this one and 7 in the Nikon mount. Thank you, Yanni. Yes, so the tripod collar here is $30 on their official web store. And again, that is also covered by the, where is it? Let me point here. I think it's over here. No, it's on the other side. That's covered by the discount code here. So if you want to grab the tripod collar, you can also get 5% off by using that discount code on screen. Okay, so let me make sure, there we go. So like I said, this is the 100mm lens does have a really good working distance. I'm going to show you those pictures once more, just for the people who may not have been here. Let me switch over. This here is at 2:1 magnification, and this is at 1:1 magnification. So you have a good working distance, which allows you to get lighting in there a lot easier than when you're right up on the subject with some of these other lenses. Okay. So I think that's about it for the 100mm lens, at least for now. Again, if you have any questions, let me know, and I will try to answer them. But for now, I think we should move on to the next lens. And I highlighted some of the differences already, going over these lenses in general. But we're going to talk about them in more detail. And the next one we're going to talk about quickly is this guy right here. This is the 65mm f2.8 CA Dreamer macro 2x lens. This is for APS-C cameras. It's a 2x macro lens. It's APO, which means that it has really great chromatic aberration performance. And since it's for APS-C, although it is a 2x macro lens, you're going to get a little bit more magnification in terms of how it looks, because you're cropping in on the image a bit more. So I'm going to show you how the magnification compares to the 2x from this 100mm lens, the full frame lens. Give me 1 second to pull those images up. Let's go into here. Double check my file names. Go into media here. So this is for Sylvania family, my Sylvania family pictures. The 65mm lens are these two files right here, this one and this one. And pull up that chromatic aberration test as well. Okay. So let's pull up the pictures again. This is again the lens I was just talking about. So now this is the maximum magnification on the 65mm 2x macro lens, which is an APS-C lens. And if I switch from this, which is on the lens it says 2x maximum magnification, over to the 100mm lens, you can see that it is actually on this APS-C lens a little bit more magnified here, and that's because the crop of the APS-C sensor. So now if we take a look, this is going back to the 100mm lens at 1:1 magnification on the lens, and now if we go into the 65mm at 1:1 magnification, you can see again there's a bit of a crop in from that because of that APS-C sensor. So on the lens you're still focusing down to 2:1 and 1:1 macro magnification, but because of the sensor size, you're getting a little bit more out of it. And you can see it's still very sharp. It looks great. These are also wide open at f2.8, both of these pictures. This and this is wide open at f2.8. And again, this lens, the 65mm, is an APO lens, so has very strong chromatic aberration performance. You can see in front of and behind the area where it's in focus, there's no coloration. No problems with chromatic aberration like you might see. Let's see if I can pull up the right file here. Yeah, this one. You might see a little bit of chromatic aberration here. This is with a 60mm lens. It's still not that bad, but this, you can see a little bit of chromatic aberration, whereas with the APO lens, it's very clean. So this is the 65mm APO, and this is the 100mm APO. And these are both at that max 2x magnification. So let's go back to this one. This is the 65mm lens, which we're talking about right now. Again, this is an f2.8 lens. And this one, unlike the 100mm, let me go back to my camera here. Okay. So this lens, unlike the 100mm, does have a, let me go back to the overhead camera, sorry, to show you a little bit more detail here. This has the manual aperture ring right here. So it will go from f2.8 down to f22, and it has clicks in this aperture ring at full stops from f2.8 to f4 to f5.6, 8, 11, 16, 22. So this one is completely all manual, whereas the 100mm lens, which I have right here, this is the EF mount, and you can see there's no aperture ring on there because this does have those electronics which communicate with the camera and allow for electronic control. But this is only for the EF mount. The other mounts do have manual aperture rings, just like this one does. Sorry, I'm just checking the comments here. Let me go back to my main camera. Sorry, I'm using the Atom Mini to switch between these cameras here, and this is kind of cluttered, so I put it on the floor and I'm trying to switch between it with my feet, and it's not going as smoothly as I planned. But yeah, the Atom Mini is really, really useful. So I'm not a Sony shooter, but if you have any questions about this, please do ask them now in the comments, and I will try my best to answer this. But I think that I covered most of it. It's a really tiny lens if you can't tell. This is without the lens hood on there. This is a 52 point, sorry. Ignore that. Let me double check my notes here. My memory is just the worst. This is a 52mm filter thread. Yeah, so it's pretty tiny. The lens hood is metal. It's really nice. And the lens itself is really, really tiny. And let me just show you the working distance with this one as well. I think I have a picture. I should have a picture. Sylvania family. I may have, there it is, I think, yeah. Okay. Let me just load these pictures in here. 10 and 11. So this is the working distance at 2:1 magnification for this 65mm lens. And this is at 1:1 magnification. So let's go back to 2:1 magnification. And just to draw a comparison, nope. 2:1 magnification. And picture 5, just to draw a comparison, this is 2:1 magnification with the 100mm lens. And there you go with the 65mm lens. So again, this is a decent working distance. You can still get some light in there pretty easily, depending on how you're lighting your macro subjects. You can still do that fairly easily with this lens. Alright, so just going back to the questions, we have another question about the probe. Is it a lot of money to spend for the lens and also a slider? Slow the bleeding. What do you think is useful in the probe lens for video without a slider to start? So David Pham, talking about the, let's put this back over here, talking about the probe lens for video especially. This is a great lens for video. And talking about using this lens with or without a slider. So I would honestly say that it really benefits from having a slider, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an expensive slider. I've used it with the Zeppin Micro 2 slider, which is now a motorized slider. And that, I think, for the slider and the motor together is just around $400. And it's fantastic. It's a really, 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 really good slider with mobile app control. It's motorized. It just works really well. Even if you don't get the motorized version, it's one of the easiest sliders that I've used to get really smooth and consistent manual motion, where it has like a fluid damping system in it, which just allows you to get that consistent speed as you're sliding it with your hands. So even if you don't get the motor, you can spend, I think it's around $200 for the slider by itself. And you can do it, I think, a lot better than just a simple carbon fiber rails slider that doesn't have any resistance. So if you don't want to go the motorized route, you can always update it later, which is also great because you can save money now and then grab the motor separately. But I would recommend at least spending a couple $100s to get like that Zeppin Micro 2 slider, for example, because with this, especially for video, if you're not showing the motion, then it kind of, I think, lacks a little bit of that special something that this lens has. It gives you a really interesting point of view, being able to, go in between things. But if you're not moving, then you can't necessarily tell you're in between things. But when you're moving, you can see that you're going towards something, and now you're in between it or you're inside of it. And I think that really makes it special because it's a point of view that you really can't get with another lens, and that motion allows you to kind of show the world that you're going into this area where you wouldn't normally be able to see on that macro scale. So some sort of slider, I think, is definitely worth it. And let's see. Can you link the slider? It would be a little bit tricky to look that up. I have like a bunch of things going on and I don't want my computer to explode. But if you follow my Facebook, you'll see a bunch of posts with that slider. It's the Zeppin Micro 2. Zeppin spelled like weapon, but with a Z. The Zeppin Micro 2. I have a couple of videos, maybe 2 or 3 videos about that slider on my YouTube channel. And I have a bunch of posts on my Facebook page as well with links and stuff. So if you really want to see it, I would recommend checking that out. But I would say that's kind of the bare minimum of what I would recommend to use with this for video. It has no stabilization, so it's going to be hard to do handheld, and maybe not impossible depending on the situation, but it's not going to look as smooth and magical. It'll obviously be handheld because there's no stabilization. If you're on a camera that has built-in stabilization, that might be interesting. I've never tried it. I'd be curious to see how it works with that. But yeah, that's my answer for this lens for video with or without a slider. So I hope that helps, but feel free to ask any other questions. But it's definitely worth at least $200 more on top of the lens. I know it's an expensive lens. I actually purchased that lens myself. I don't have it here. This is the one that they sent me. And one of my partners, my business partners, is using the lens. So they were nice enough to send me this one for this video. But I have bit that bullet, and it's an expensive lens, but it's really cool what you can do with it, and especially paired with a slider. There's another comment from, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, Michaud Hermans. I have the 25mm Laowa lens, and I find it very difficult to make pictures with it, and I believe that's this lens that you're talking about right here. So I planned on going in order, but we're going to jump around a bit, I guess. So this lens right here, let me go in the overhead camera just to give you a better point of view. This lens right here is a 25mm lens that goes from 2.5 to 5 times magnification, which is extremely, extremely highly magnified, to put it bluntly. You can see that the barrel does extend as you zoom out to that, not zoom out, but as you go towards that 5 times magnification, and it gets more compact. And if you take off the lens hood here, which kind of clicks on and screws off, you can see that the front of the lens is really, really tiny. So that does allow you to get light in there a little bit more. And with this lens, you're definitely going to need more light because it was explained really well by, I believe it was the previous person in this series. Let me find my notes here. Don, I can't pronounce his last name, I apologize. Don explained it really, really well in the previous video in this Laowa Macro Master series. But as you go closer and closer past 1-to-1 macro magnification, the aperture actually gets smaller and smaller. Even though this is a 2.8 lens, it's measured 2.8 at infinity, and as you go closer and closer past 1-to-1 macro magnification, the aperture gets smaller, which means that you need more and more light. So as you go closer to 5 times magnification here, you're really going to need a lot more light to keep a low ISO, or to get, I mean, handheld shots with this lens are really, really difficult. You're going to need either a lot of light or a really high ISO if you want to go handheld with this, especially at 5 times magnification. A tripod and lighting is definitely going to be a must to get the most out of this lens, but when you do, you can get some really, really great results with it. So let me just really quickly jump back into the pictures and I'll show you how much that 5 times magnification is. Once again on, where is it? My little Sylvania family doll here, this little guy right here. Let me put this back down for now, and I'll go back to this camera. And let me just find those pictures really quickly. Let's see. So now we're on the 25mm lens. Let's see, this is 460, 465, 460, 465, and let me grab these pictures as well. Alright, so we're going to start off with picture 15 here. 18. Alright, so this is the working distance when you're at that 2.5 times magnification with that 25mm lens. And you can see that there's a decent amount of clearance. There's no lens hood for this lens, and the shape of the front of the lens really gives you a lot of clearance to get light in there. And again, like I said, for this lens, 2.5, 3.5, you know, up to 5 times magnification, you're really going to need a lot of light to make it work effectively. So let's now jump over to, I believe it's this picture here. No. All right, this is the 2.5 times magnification from this 25mm lens. So again, let's go back to 2 times magnification with the 100mm lens, and 2.5 times magnification with that 25mm lens. And again, this is wide open at f2.8. And then if you jump up to 5 times magnification, you can see quite a lot of detail. And again, this is wide open, so you're getting an incredibly shallow depth of field. So that's another challenge with this lens, is the shallow depth of field that you're dealing with. And you can close down the aperture, but it's only going to help so much. So if you really want to get more in focus, more detail out of a lens like this, then you're probably going to want to do focus stacking, where you take multiple pictures at different focal points and then blend them all together in Photoshop. And that's quite a labor-intensive process, or at least it can be. Just a second. Okay, sorry, just reading comments here. But yeah, so you can have a lot of challenges with this lens. Let me go back to my main camera here as I talk. There's a lot of challenges with this lens for sure. The two main ones being that you're going to need a lot of light to make sure that you can keep a low ISO, and that if you want to do handheld with this lens, especially if you close down past wide open at f2.8, you're going to need more and more and more and more light. And especially as you go from 2.5 even further into that 5 times magnification, you're going to need a couple stops more light. So that is one of the challenges to get good quality pictures out of this. So if you want to get a lower ISO, maybe you can use a tripod, so that way you don't have to worry about slow shutter speeds. And that is one way, but that's going to need some light. But again, the shape of the lens lets it light get in there easily. So if you do have a flash or some sort of light source, then that's going to be a lot, this is easier than some of these other lenses actually to get light onto your subject. The other challenge is just that the depth of field is incredibly shallow because you're really, really going in incredibly close here, even at 2.5 times magnification, but this can go all the way up to 5. And you're going in incredibly close there. So you're going to have a very shallow depth of field, and even if you stop down all the way to f16, you're going to start dealing with diffraction at that point and lose some of the sharpness. So if you really want more detail in your photos, the best way to do that is going to be to not close down all the way the aperture, but actually to take multiple photos at different focal points and then stack them in Photoshop. And that can get quite difficult. You're not going to really be able to do that handheld too easily, again, especially with this lens. So you're going to need a little bit more equipment if you want to do something like that. And that's something that I really want to get into, but I am not the best person to talk about that. I don't have a whole lot of experience with it, but this lens can definitely give you some magical images if you're able to use it in that way. You get a lot of light in there and use a tripod and stack photos. You can get some magical photos with that lens. Again, it's going to be a very specialty lens. So this lens, the 25mm lens with that 2.5 to 5 times magnification, does not focus to infinity. It only focuses at that macro magnification. So there actually is no excuse my phone. There actually is no real focus ring on here because you're not shifting the focus. If you want to move your focus, you have to move the entire camera or the entire lens basically to move where is in focus, to get closer to your subject or further away from your subject. It's a fixed focus lens, I guess you could say. You can change the amount of magnification from 2.5 to 5, but that's as far as you can go with it. So you're not going to be able to take normal photos with this lens. Whereas you can with, I think, pretty much all of these other lenses will focus to infinity. This one does not. Double check the comments here. As Yenny said, the probe lens is also really great for nature. So it'll allow you to get closer to bugs and insects and things that maybe you don't want to be right up, with your face or with your hands right up on them. You can keep a little bit of physical distance from those insects and stuff, which is really cool. And you can also get into places to take pictures of nature, small things, with really cool perspective. You can see a lot. Because this is a wide-angle lens, it's 24mm. You're going to have a pretty wide field of view, and that also means that a lot of it's going to be in focus. So you can show a lot of where you're at. Instead with the 100mm lens, for example, you've got a pretty narrow field of view. It's all blurred out in the background, but with the 24mm, you're going to have a lot of that background in your image and a lot of the background in focus, and that can be a challenge and a blessing, depending on which way you look at it or depending on what you want your image to look like. But because there is so much detail in the image, it's a wide field of view, there's a deeper depth of field, and because it can go places that other lenses just can't, it's definitely going to get you some really great pictures in nature that other lenses just can't do. And it does also have, I guess we'll jump to talking about that a bit more in detail, but it does also have an LED on the tip, which means that if you're diving like under bushes or into like holes and trees and stuff to get those unique points of view, then you're not going to have any light in those locations. So you can actually use USB power. There's this little dock right here, USB dock, and the tip of this lens is also waterproof, so you can go underwater with it. From here onto the tip is waterproof, so that's another place you can get unique photos that you can't get so easily with these other lenses. Excuse me, with these other lenses. And that USB LED does help there. The light quality is honestly not the best that I've seen. It's alright. I think it's about an 80 CRI. The R9 values are pretty low if you're like a really technical person for that type of thing. But it gets light on your subject in places where you just can't get any other light. So it's great for that lens design. Alright. Okay. Sorry, we gotta speed this up. It's been over an hour now, so let's continue on, we've talked about the 100mm lens, we've talked about the 65mm lens, we just talked a bit about the 25mm lens. And if you have any questions about this, please do let me know. I will try to address those if I can. And let me just make sure that I didn't miss anything special about the 25mm lens here. All right, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so let's move on. And let's talk just a little bit more about the probe lens here. This lens, again, has its challenges, like we talked about. It's really great for video, like with a slider, for example, where you can show that motion into or out of some place that you typically couldn't go with the camera, which gives it that kind of magical feel. And that's what I really like it for, is to get that unique point of view in places that you really can't go with other lenses. In that motion of, moving into or moving around somewhere where you typically can't, where the viewer might ask, how do they do that? They don't know exactly what's going on, but this lens can do that for you. It's an f/14 lens. It can go from f/14 to f/40, and that can also be a challenge. Once again, speaking of challenging lenses, f/14 as the maximum aperture means, again, you're going to need a lot of light for this lens, a lot of light. And again, that's if you shoot it wide open, which you don't necessarily always want to do. So if you stop it down a little bit to f/16, f/22, then you're going to want even more light on your subject. So you're going to need a lot of video lights. There are a couple of mounts available now. I believe it's EF and PL mounts that are available now, and more mounts should be coming. I don't know the details about that just yet. Sorry, there is now EF, Nikon F, Sony FE, and Pentax K mounts available in the standard version of this lens, which I have here. And then you've got RE, PL, and EF mounts available in the Cine version, which has geared rings for the aperture and the focus. And again, there's new mounts coming. Don't know the details just yet, but that should be coming maybe soon, hopefully soon. And I think that covers most of what we would want to talk about with this lens. But yeah, it's going to give you that unique point of view, that unique perspective, and also the ability to go into areas which you couldn't typically get, to give you a little bit of distance from subjects that you might not want to get close to or might not be able to get close to. So again, a specialty lens, not something you're going to use all the time, but for those shots where you need it, it's definitely going to do something that other lenses can't do. And even when you don't need it, it can be fun and kind of open up for creative ideas for otherwise seemingly boring subjects, which is cool. All right, let's move on now to the 60mm lens here. And I'm going to start this off with some sample pictures. Let me just load those up. $60 millimeters, 452, 453. Chromatic aberration. Okay. All right, so let's start off with this picture here. This is the Laowa 60mm lens at 2x magnification on full frame camera. So this is a 2.8 lens. This is shot at f2.8, and this can go down to 2:1 magnification. It's 60mm. So if you're looking at it compared to the 100mm, it's not a huge difference. This is 2 times magnification on the 100mm lens. This is 2 times magnification on the 60mm lens. Not a huge difference. You can see you still get very shallow depth of field, a very artistic looking photo, which is nice. If you're using this on an APS-C camera, of course, you're going to get even more magnification. So that's going to give you a little bit more magnification than the 100mm lens can, unless you're using that on a APS-C camera too. But the 60mm lens can only go to infinity focus when you're on an APS-C sensor. So I think even though it can be used on full frame, it is limited on full frame. You'll get the full use out of it if you're using it on an APS-C sensor. You can shoot all the way to infinity, which means that this is a great walk around lens as well as macro lens, 2 times macro lens. So it's kind of a do-it-all lens if you think of it like that. Let me go back to my notes real quickly. This was actually the first ever lens of Laowa. It was released in January 2015, and it hit the market as the world's first 2:1 macro lens with infinity focus. But again, as I said, infinity focus is only on APS-C cameras, but that is very, very versatile if you're shooting an APS-C camera. Very, very versatile. As you can see, the image quality is pretty great still. This is 2 times magnification. This is 1:1 magnification, I believe. Sorry, I have too many pictures to sort through here. And this is the working distance that you're getting here. This is at 2 times magnification. This is at 1 times magnification. And then this here is nothing. Let me go back and find, I thought I had my chromatic aberration shot in there just a moment. Sorry, let me go back to my camera here. Chromatic aberration test for the 60mm is 491. Drag it into slot 20. Okay, and so now this is chromatic aberration on the 60mm lens. You can see there is a little bit of chromatic aberration compared to the 100mm and 65mm we talked about, which are APO lenses. That means that they have little to no chromatic aberration. There is a bit on this lens that you don't see, but otherwise, I mean, it's very sharp. It has great image quality otherwise. Again, 2:1 magnification here looks really great. Very, very sharp, and still a pretty shallow depth of field. And again, this was on a full frame camera. Let me go overhead here and just show you really quickly the lens in a bit more detail, and also go back and check the stream here. Okay. So this is the lens. I have a filter on here right now. It's a 62mm filter thread, if you're curious. And you can see, just like the 100mm lens, which we showed you earlier in this stream, as you zoom out to infinity, the lens, the actual front element does recess quite deep inside of the barrel, but with this one you have this little, I guess you could say, kind of built-in lens hood. And then when you're at 2:1 magnification, the front element is all the way up to the front of the lens. The actual front element is pretty small. And you've got a manual aperture ring, which again goes from f2.8 to f22 with full stop clicked aperture. It's a clicked aperture ring. And you've got your markings on here for your 2:1 magnification, 1.5, 1:1, things like that. It's a fairly smooth and heavy focus ring, if you're curious. Has this texture to it. Again, this is not weather sealed. None of these lenses are weather sealed. And this one, again, has no electronics on it. The only one that has electronics that I'm showing today is the 100mm lens, and only in the EF mount. So this is a fully manual lens. And very, very well priced. But they say this is, not the best build quality, but it is still a great, great solid lens. It's built pretty well. I have no complaints about it. But again, keep in mind, if you're in a full frame camera, you will not get the infinity focus functionality of this lens. So I would recommend the 100mm lens instead of this if you like the general look, the blurry background, narrow field of view, but you want to have the versatility of being able to focus all the way to infinity, I'd recommend the 100mm lens over this for full frame users. Okay, I'm getting through this. Let me just touch on the mounts for that once more. The 60mm lens, where are we here? 60. The 60mm lens comes in Canon, Nikon, Sony A, Pentax K, and Sony E mounts. I already said it, but again, my notes that I made for myself, it has a reasonable working distance, so it's easy for lighting. Less light required than the 25mm 2.5 times to 5 times lens. So it's going to be a little bit easier to use even for 2 times macro, same as the 100mm lens. I just found them easier to use. You can also shift the focus a little bit with those lenses, whereas with the 25mm, you're going to have to move the whole camera, which makes it a little bit trickier to use. Yeah, let's see if we got any questions. 60mm is slightly smaller than the 100mm. So as Laowa, I just pointed out in the comments, of course, between mounts, the weights of the lens may change a little bit, but if you want to see the sizes, I don't know how well you can see that. Black on black, I apologize. Let me slide over, no, this way. There you go, you can see them a little bit more clearly. Of course, the 60mm lens is a bit shorter, maybe a few centimeters shorter than the 100mm lens. It's a bit lighter. So if you're concerned about the size of the lenses and you only want macro, then you can go for this one. Or if you're on an APS-C camera, this is going to be a really, really great versatile lens. 2-to-1 macro all the way to infinity focus. 60mm is going to be a great all-around focal length for you APS-C users as well. Great for portraits and full frame. Go for this guy. I think that's my personal recommendation. Okay, if we're not missing any questions here, I'm going to jump onto this lens. And let me touch on this real quick. I missed this actually. This is a lens collar for the 25mm lens. It's a Arca Swiss plate on the bottom here. Simple, just a little collar that will slide onto the 25mm lens, just like that. If you loosen it up, of course. There you go, boom, you can rotate it. So that may make it easier to use, depending on your setup. And this is the 15mm lens. This is an f4 lens. Most of the others, the 100mm, the 65, and the 60 were all 2.8 lenses. This is an f4 lens, 15mm, and this is a 1-to-1 macro lens. It does not go to 2 times magnification, like all of the others do actually. This is the only 1-to-1 lens here, but again, 15mm is incredibly wide, and I believe it's still the widest 1-to-1 macro lens available, which is really cool. It's going to give you a very, very unique perspective. And again, I apologize, centimeters, are you Canadian? I'm not Canadian, I'm American, but I live in Japan, so I've gotten quite accustomed to centimeters. So my apologies to all you American people watching. So this 15mm lens, back to this. This is a 1-to-1 macro lens, and as you can see here, it has this little lever for that shift feature. You can shift it 6mm up and down. Sorry, it's kind of hard to do this, not on a camera. There you go. So you can get a little bit of that shift functionality with this lens, which is kind of cool. It does have some distortion when you use that, unfortunately. But it's not bad. It's cool. It's fun. So you can see the front of the lens here. Of course, this does have a removable lens hood, but if you're doing macro with this, you're probably going to want to take that off almost 100% of the time, and you'll see why in just a second. The glass, I don't know how well you can see this, but there's a little bit of space between the front of the lens and where the glass actually is, but your minimum focus distance is actually pretty much right where the front, like I could put this down on the table like this and probably be focused on the table. It's incredibly a small working distance. And as you zoom out, It does also extend the barrel just a little bit. There's not that much of movement there, but the barrel does extend just a little bit. It's longest at 1:1 magnification. And you've got a manual aperture ring on the front, which is a little bit different from usual. Usually you have it in the back. And this goes from f4 to f32, and this is actually a declicked aperture ring. So it's a smooth aperture ring, so you can dial that in exactly how you want. And if you guys are going to think of some questions, let me take that. It's a 77mm front filter thread, so if you want to use filters on here, you actually can. And it's a standard 77mm front filter thread. Build quality wise, it's an interesting lens. It's all metal, all of these are, and it feels pretty solid. You can see the back of the lens is a little bit, I guess weird could be the right word, but you know, it's that shift feature where you can see how the whole rear part of the lens will shift there around the rear element when you're using that feature there. Alright, so let me pull up a couple of pictures here to show you why this can be a challenging lens, and then we'll talk about why it could still be a really great lens for some circumstances, some situations. But for me, honestly, this has been probably the most challenging lens, I guess, in some ways. Again, the 25mm we talked about, this ultra macro lens, is very challenging in its own ways as well, but let's pull up a couple of pictures here to show you the magnification. And before we jump into that, the twin flash, I actually have a video on my YouTube channel about that from a while ago, but I don't have it here now. I didn't get it this time to test, sorry. Let me reload some of these photos in here. Let's go from 7. All right, sorry, just give me a minute as I pull these photos up. Let's go. And 8. Let's put this in 9. Sorry, just give me just a moment here as I look through these pictures. Let's go just to 10. Okay. All right, so let's jump over to this photo. So this is with the 15mm at 1:1 magnification, and this is not that great of a picture. It's sharp and it's fine, and you can see a little bit. I mean, there's not really too much going on around this. Again, I've only had this for a day. I apologize, I didn't get a chance to really go out and shoot any very interesting pictures with it, but you can see that compared to something like, again, we'll go back to the extreme opposite. This is the 100mm lens, and you can see how narrow that field of view is compared to the 15mm lens. That little bit of blue in the background that you can see, that's the Laowa, that's this thing right here in the background. So you can see that the field of view here is a lot wider on that 15mm lens. So this is still 1:1 macro, but this is 1:1 macro with a 100mm lens. And you can see that just you're getting an incredibly shallow depth of field with quite a lot of I can't think of the word at the moment. Compression. It's compressing that background, so that way that small little bit of blue that you can see in this picture behind that doll is filling up the entire background of the picture with the 100mm lens. So this is not that interesting of a picture, but you can kind of get the idea maybe of the extreme difference in the field of view that you're getting here. And while this is not, a great subject for the 15mm macro, this is going to let you, especially in nature, photograph bugs and insects in their environment in a very interesting way. You can really see them in their environment, which for insects and bugs can really bring your photography to another level. That's not my specialty, so I'm not going to pretend like it is, but you can see here how incredibly close the working distance is for that 15mm lens. This is at 1:1 magnification. And if I jump to this photo, you can see again taking pictures of really tiny flowers. The flower that is literally almost touching the lens ends up with a photo like this. Again, it's not, an amazing photo or anything like that, but, that's literally seeing everything that is right up on that glass. So that does present its own challenges, because this is even without the lens hood blocking a lot of the light from the subject. And you can see here, that's why the front of that little doll is so dark compared to something like this, where I had more working distance between the lens and the subject to get light in there. It's going to be a lot more challenging when you're working like this. So that is something to think about if you want full 1:1 magnification. That is, of course, you don't have to use this lens to get full 1:1 magnification. And then you could, back off a bit. But that's what we're dealing with. And again, this is, shooting some flowers in the few hours that I had with this lens. And, you can still see quite a lot. There's a lot more. This is wide open with this lens at f4, but still this is a 1:1 magnification, and you're getting quite a lot of detail in that photo. Even the blurry background, you can still see what it is a lot more than with another lens. So if this was, a photo of an insect in their environment, for example, you could really see, even if it's a little bit blurry, you'll still see where they are, and it gives a little bit more information to that photo, which makes it so well adept for that type of photography. So let's jump back to here and jump back into the chat here. Okay. And thank you, Laowa, for sharing my review of that twin flash. But anyway, yes, so this has its own challenges, especially for getting light onto your subject when you're at 1:1. And I was trying I only had a few hours yesterday, so I was trying to shoot all that I could at that maximum magnification, just for demonstration purposes. So I did have a hard time with it. But if you back off just a little bit, then of course you're going to have a much better working distance. And the interesting thing you can do with this is basically if you have insects crawling on the glass here, you can take a picture and they'll be in focus, which is really cool. So that's why I think this really, really makes it a fantastic lens for photographing in nature, because again, you could have a dog's nose like smelling the lens, practically touching the lens, and you can get it in focus. You could have an insect crawling on there, and the distance of their legs on the glass to the body is probably enough distance to actually get their body in focus. And then you can see the whole environment around them, which is really, really cool. You could put like a little stick, you could tape a little stick across the front of the lens. Again, there's a little bit of clearance here between the glass and this actual, like where the filter thread is. So you could, put a little stick on there and then have the bug or a spider or something on the stick, and then, just focus on them. You can get really, really close. And that's something that this lens does that other lenses can't, which is kind of cool. And if you're into bug photography, insect photography, again, it's not my specialty, I imagine you could have a lot of fun with this lens and get some very, very interesting and informative pictures, showing the entire environment of where you're photographing, which definitely makes this a very unique lens. Okay. I think that's kind of it. But again, so like I said, this does have a lens hood, but it's going to block a lot of the light when you're trying to do macro photography. So I honestly don't like this. It's probably the least, it's actually not that bad now as I talk about it, but it's a little bit loose. This is not the best lens hood in all honesty, but you're not going to be using it a lot of the time when you're shooting macro anyway. But I think that's about it. I know that I didn't actually cover absolutely everything on all of these lenses. I made a bunch of notes, but it takes too long to try and search through them, so I'm trying to go off the top of my head here. But I want to spend a couple of minutes more just to make sure that if you guys have any questions, I want to address all of that as much as I can. I'm sorry that I kind of ramble a lot, and I may have spent more time on this than I should have. But with 6 macro lenses here, there's a lot of information to get through. So I hope that this could kind of give you a bit more information, more than you can see just from the specs on the website. Sometimes you're reading the specs and it doesn't really give you, doesn't really give you a feel for what it's going to be like using the lens in real. Oh my God, excuse me. Doesn't give you a feel for what it's going to be like using the lens in real life. So that was my goal here today, and just to make sure that I do that, I am going to recap while I'm waiting for a few pictures. Just what I think the highlights in terms of the best usage for each of these lenses are. So the 100mm f2.8 2x macro lens is going to be great for full frame shooters. It's going to give you a really shallow depth of field, a really narrow field of view, which I think makes really, really artistic photos a lot of fun. And it's going to be a great lens, versatile lens, because it can focus to infinity on full frame. So you can use it for portraits, you can use it for landscape, you can use it for a whole lot. I love the 100, around 85 to 135mm focal length is what I really love shooting at. So this is perfect for me for a range of different types of photography. And it can do 2:1 macro, which is fantastic. It's also under $500. All of these lenses are, except for the probe lens. And if you look at this code here, this discount code, you can get 5% off on all of these lenses on venuslens.net until May 31st. So I would definitely recommend, if you want to get into macro photography, to use this discount code and pick up one of these. But yeah, if you're on full frame, I really, really like this lens a lot. And I do want to hold onto it or get another copy of it so that way I can play with it more, test it more. And hopefully I will be doing that. So if you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, as well as, of course, Laowa's, or follow me on Facebook, hopefully I should have a lot more sample photos, as well as maybe a full review for at least this lens coming up. So check me out. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/c/Scott Dumas. So if you want to check that out, if you're not already subscribed, please consider that. So that is my recommendation. This is my favorite lens. We'll just go in order here. The probe lens is a very unique lens. It's most expensive, between around $1,500. And I would recommend getting at least a slider with it. We talked about the Zeppin Micro 2 slider is pretty affordable, motorized or non-motorized slider for this lens. It helps you, especially for video. I love using this for video. You can move into or come out of, move around places that you can't typically go with other lenses, but it does have its challenges. It's an f/14 lens for the maximum aperture. You're going to need a lot of light, so think about that. And it's also really difficult to handhold. It's weird to handhold. You can do some really cool tricks with it, but it's going to be a pretty unique lens, and it's not going to be something you use every shoot. There are definitely going to be a lot of creative ideas that come from just having this lens, I think, and there are going to be shots that you can't get without it. It's great for nature photography, for going into places that you can't get with other lenses, for creating a bit of a working distance between you and your subjects. It's waterproof from here on, and it has that LED light built in, so you can get light into those areas which are hard to reach. There is a bit of a color shift on it, so especially if you're shooting video, make sure that you do use a custom white balance. And I think it's a very specialty lens. It's not the cheapest, and it's not going to be used on every shoot. But if you check out their website, Venus Laowa's website, you can see some really cool shots for video and photo with this lens that I think will really get you excited for it, because the things it can do are just very, very unique. Then we'll move on to the Sony lens. This is in a lot of ways similar to the 100mm lens. This is an APS-C lens. It's also 2x magnification, and it's a APO lens, which is the same as the 100mm, but they're both APO lenses. They're very, very good chromatic aberration performance, pretty much no chromatic aberration. And this is again not micro four thirds, sorry, this is an APS-C lens. So even though it's a 2x lens, you're going to get a bit more magnification out of it because of that APS-C crop. And otherwise it's really tiny, which is great, especially for those APS-C cameras. So very, very nice lens there if you're an APS-C user. 25mm lens, this is again a full frame lens, very, very unique and challenging. It does not focus to infinity. It only does 2.5 to 5x magnification, which is extreme macro. It's really, really close up. It's kind of a one-trick pony in that way. It can only do that. And it's a bit difficult to use because with that magnification of 5 times or even 2.5 times, you're going to need a lot of light. It's going to be difficult to handhold. You're going to want some a tripod or even some more specialty gear for this, because you might want to use focus stacking to get a lot more detail in your image. The depth of field is incredibly shallow, but it is a very, very strong performing lens, and it can again get you shots that other lenses just can't. The 60mm f2.8 2x macro lens is again kind of similar to the 100mm lens, but I think this really shines on a crop sensor camera because you can use it for macro on a full frame camera, but it can only shoot infinity focus on APS-C cameras, on crop sensor cameras. So I would just personally recommend, if you like that kind of shallow depth of field, shallow field of view, selective focus type macro, which I really, really do, it's very artistic, then if you're on a crop sensor camera, this is probably going to be the best choice. And if you're on a full frame camera, this is probably going to be the best choice. You could also go for this lens right here, which is another really, really great crop sensor lens. So that's a very good choice as well. And finally, we have that 15mm lens, which can present its challenges because of how close you have to get to your subject for full 1:1 magnification, but the wide field of view, it's going to give you a very, very unique perspective. You can see your subject in their environment. You could get really creative with like insect shots where you have insects crawling on the glass and actually in focus, or very, very up close to the lens and still in focus with a very interesting surrounding view. And basically, you're just not going to be limited to how close you can go to things and still get them in focus, which is kind of cool. But it does, again, have its own challenges. And there's also the shift feature, which, it's not meant to be used as that is the main feature, but it is there, which is kind of cool. It adds a little bit of something extra to an already very interesting lens. I'm surprised there's still people here watching. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks, Johnny, for watching. Appreciate it. There are new mounts coming for all of these. Again, if you want to find out more, then be sure to follow Laowa's page. They'll have more information coming up. And one last thing I should have mentioned earlier in the stream while there were still more people here, but there's one more. Let me put the graphic up for this, actually. Might as well, right? Let's see here. Let me put this on screen. I'm new to OBS, so forgive me. Let's grab an image. And let's find that image and go to Dropbox Laowa folder. Other material. Make sure I have the right one here. And we're going to start off with this guy. That is huge. Why did these pictures come in huge? I don't know what I'm doing. Save me. Okay, I made my own picture small. Whatever, deal with it. All right, we're gonna move this over here, and we're gonna get this picture to fit in the frame here. All right, there we go. Boom. Let's just fill up the frame with it. So let me put my discount code on top of that. So this is the next live stream we've got coming next week on May 29th from Thomas. We can ask Thomas about anything about macro photography. So that is going to be a very interesting one. Great chance to get all of your questions answered by Thomas Showhand. And be sure to check that out. And I am also excited to announce, let me actually just do this real quick here. Okay, let me resize my picture here. I am a mess with OBS. I need to learn how to use this. Alright, so actually Laowa Lens will have 4 new live streams in June, which is great. This has been a very, very informative series. So if you have been watching, then you'll know about that. But if you haven't been watching yet, then you may not know how informative this series really is, and that sounds like I'm trying to sell something there, but this is a really, really great way to, there we go, okay. This is a really, really great way to get into macro photography if you haven't already. And you've got 4 more chances, well, 5 more chances, 1 more this month, and then 4 more next month that are going to be really, really interesting. So we've got Jumping Spider in a super close-up coming on June 5th, and then you've got a comparison of Laowa lenses to all the lenses that Michael's owned there on June 12th. Macro Myths Dispelled, how to take advanced macro shots. That's going to be a really, really interesting one. Going to clear up probably a lot of subjects for you there, and so you want to be a conservation photographer, so a very interesting topic to finish that off to at the end of June. So 4 more in June to look forward to. I definitely recommend checking out this series if you haven't already. It is extremely, extremely educational. I've learned a lot, and I hope that I get to hang on to this lens a little bit longer so I can really, really use the things that I've learned in this series and apply them with these new awesome lenses. So again, huge thank you to Laowa. I'm rambling here. Everybody's probably gone already, but a huge thank you to Laowa for letting me be part of this series. I hope this was informational for everybody watching. I'm honored to be part of this, and yeah, thank you. A big thank you to everybody who was part of this. And yeah, that's about it. I'm gonna sign off now. Thanks very much. See ya.